Hello all, welcome to the live stream. If you haven't watched these before, I normally do them every week. I haven't done it for a couple of weeks. I was away last week. And what we do is have a quick look at the major announcements for next week. There's a lot out next week to do with US inflation, so I think it could be an interesting week. And then also go through the major markets. So indices, oil, gold, silver. We'll have a look at crypto, a little bit of everything to see where the opportunities might be. We have, of course, just had the payrolls. This is the S&P 500. We saw a big move, relatively big move, after some boring few days for the stock market, for the US stock market. So we saw the S&P lifted about 40 points or so on the payrolls. The NASDAQ rallied, where was it? About 19,880. So it went up to almost 20,080. So almost 200 points on the NASDAQ. So I think it made for an interesting afternoon. After, like I say, a bit of a choppy week. I've been long the S&P. I've been long the S&P since Tuesday at 5,700. So I mean, it's done all right, but I've had to be patient, waiting to see what happens. So we'll do all that. We'll look at these markets in a bit more detail, and if there's anything you want looking at, if you put it into the chat, then I'll go through the stuff you want looking at. I'm just making sure everything is working. I think it's all working, isn't it? Okay, let's just go through some of the housekeeping, then we'll get into it. Let's just do a risk warning. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones accepts no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets, CFDs, futures, foreign exchange work, and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Trading is risky. I did a webinar 2 weeks ago now on my day trading approach, exactly the sort of trading I did to set up that S&P buy earlier in the week. I talk about trading setups, where to place stop losses, when to take profits, and the low risk, high reward, false break approach, which was my trade for this week, I think, buying 5,700. That was using that approach. And also when not to trade. If you'd like to watch that webinar, I think it's about 45, 50 minutes long. You just need to be part of the WhatsApp group. And I'll give you details on how to join the WhatsApp group later in this session. You only need to join for a month and you can access that webinar. I'll give you the link to that webinar once you're part of the group. So looking ahead to next week, it's all in the second half of the week. I think most of the big stuff. So on Wednesday, US Fed minutes. So the minutes from the last meeting of the US Central Bank, always interesting to see how they came to the decision they came to, and what they think about the state of the economy and where they think interest rates, some hints perhaps as to where interest rates might go next. On Thursday, we've got US CPI, Consumer Price Index, so the retail price inflation. Of course, inflation very much linked to the health of the economy and what the Americans might be doing with interest rates, so that's a big one. And then on Friday, we've got US PPI, Producer Price Index, so again, an inflation indicator. So quite a lot towards the end of next week. So we'll come back. I'll be back. I should be back next Friday, and we'll take all this stuff in a bit more detail and see what impact it's had. Okay, let's get into it. Let's take a look at these markets. So I think it's been a boring week this week. It's been a boring week for me anyway. I've sat on that S&P trade all this week. Now, but if we take a look at the bigger picture, trend is still up. You know, in these US markets, we had that big sell-off in July, August, but markets have, looking at the S&P, have pushed out to fresh all-time highs once again. So a market that pushes out to fresh all-time highs is positive. For a short-term level, you know, I think looking on the hourlies, 56.70 had been support back on the 20th of September, so that's 2 Fridays ago, so a couple of weeks ago. So for now, I am still happy to buy the dip in US indices, and that's the trade I did this week. It was a logical trade for me to do. It's the only trade I've done this week. So pretty boring week. Let's see how it goes. I think if we did see the market come under pressure this afternoon, because it's not unusual to have a move off the payrolls and then see a market, perhaps give a chunk of that move up, then I'd still be a buyer of the dip. Let's see how it goes. With the Nasdaq, the Nasdaq hasn't moved to fresh all-time highs. The high for the Nasdaq was set in July. We've come close, but no cigar so far. So a bit more interesting, the Nasdaq perhaps, but overall, for me, this 19.6 level on the Nasdaq is an interesting one. Highs on the way up in mid-September, and has again supported the market all this week. But we've definitely seen, if you watch stock markets, I'm sure we've definitely seen a cooling towards some of those big tech stocks over the last few months. Let's have a quick look at the likes of Apple. What do they look like at the moment? Yeah, they set their all-time high in mid-July, and we've been a bit chopperama since then. Nvidia was, of course, a big powerhouse for these markets, for the tech index moving higher. Again, a bit like Apple. Set the high in June, Nvidia, and just a bit choppy since then. So let's see. And the Dow again, the Dow Jones moved to a fresh all-time high. You can see just how boring it's been this week. Just up one day, down the next. And on the Dow, 41.8 has been support. So let's see what happens this afternoon. I've been keeping an occasional eye on it all the last couple of days because I've had this trade on, but it hasn't really done much. It's been a day of chop. That was Wednesday, chop. Thursday, chop. Today, okay, big move. Can it build on it, or does it fall back into the range, the low 5700s on the S&P and chop again? I don't know. What has been a interesting market, and I missed it. I missed the move, and I've been blown away by the size of the move. But the China 50, so the China A50, and the Hong Kong Hang Seng as well. I think what a week or two they've had. I was looking at this. The Hang Seng was the one I was thinking about buying because we had this downtrend on the dailies that actually goes back to February 21. It broke out of it in May of this year, rallies, falls back. That's where I should have bought if I'd been paying attention. Comes back near the old low, and then it has gone absolutely bananas over the last 3 weeks. So it's gone from 17,000 to 22,700 today. So what's that? Nearly a 6,000 point move. So nearly a 30% move in the Hang Seng, and the same for the China 50. Look at that, absolute, perhaps even more of a move in the China 50. And that is an amazing move. We've gone from 11.1 to its best levels in 2.5 years for the China A50. So I think that they're interesting markets to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. If we see these gains given up, where do we see the buyers step back in? So I thought they were an interesting market. Definitely much more interesting than the US markets recently. If you look at the FTSE, pretty boring, the FTSE. The big trend, the UK FTSE 100, big trend is still up, but just for almost a month now, just choppy and in a tight range. So nothing too exciting there. The Aussie index, I am still long the Aussie index from May, I think. The trend is up. It made a new all-time high in end of September, so it's still positive. I still buy the dip, but again, it's been a little bit marking time the last few weeks or so. The French index is interesting. I was looking at this earlier this week. There's arguably a buy in the France, the CAC 40. We'd had this trend. This is on the hourly charts. We'd had the trend up since early September, and it went from 7.3 to 7.8. It sold off. It has broken the trend line, but it has held above these old lows around 74.50, 74.60. So I think that's an interesting market for perhaps the rest of today, going into next week. Do we see the old French get a move on? And actually that trend goes back to August if I'd have taken it out. There you go. So I think that's an interesting market. So for me, I could be tempted to be a buyer of that. Let's see how it all ends today. On the dailies, it doesn't look quite as interesting. But I think this 74.60 might be an important level. Let's see what happens. On the DAX, the German DAX, again, I'd be thinking about buying the DAX. The DAX hit fresh all-time highs end of September, breaking out through the highs from May. And for me, one of my favourite approaches is to buy a dip after a breakout. The question is just how far does the dip go? But I think that's another interesting market for next week. If we flip it over to the hourlies, if I was buying the DAX, I probably wouldn't buy it today, but maybe one for Monday, assuming we see a bit more stability today, and perhaps a stop the other side of 18,850, something like that. But I think that's an interesting market, the DAX, given the strength we've seen, the run since the August lows. It's broken out, it's pulled back, so does the market go bang and off we go to maybe 20,000, or does it just collapse? Let's see. But I think that's an interesting market to watch next week. So that's the what's it, the DAX, the dollar index. Let's look at that. I mean, the dollar index, again, this has been a boring market for some time. The trend, if you look at it like that over the last year, it's been pretty sideways, broad sideways range. The trend had been down since July, but it's back down at levels where it turned around last time. So it's interesting, I think, here. We've seen it break out today. Does that breakout carry on into next week? I don't know. But a strong move today. I suppose an aggressive trade here, if you thought the strength off the back of the payrolls was overdone, an aggressive trade would be to be short, go short, and look to see if it pulls back into this range it was in for a good month or so, months to 6 weeks. So that's maybe an interesting market to watch next week, particularly given the fact we have the Fed minutes coming out and also the something else, all that inflation data towards the end of the week. So that's an interesting one to watch. Oil, I did, obviously some moves in oil this week, given what's been going on in the Middle East. Whenever there is unrest or military action, that is going to have an impact on the price of oil. I think that's when, this is on Tuesday, when the Israel attacks on Iran started, I think, and then Iran bombed back. Anyway, so we saw big move in the oil price. Went from 68 to 72 in the matter of a few hours. I did wonder if this downtrend was going to stay in place and the right move was to sell oil. That's what I would have done. I didn't do anything in the end. But it's broken out. So that's another interesting one for next week. I think the oil price, is this now the start of a turn in oil, or has it just rallied higher because of the news, and next week we see perhaps the sellers come back in? It'll be interesting. For me, I would be quite tempted probably to still be a seller if it runs out of steam, and the closest I would want my stop is at the moment the other side of those August highs, maybe 78, 70 highs on my chart anyway, from late August, which is about $4 higher than where it is now. But it's been a volatile week. We've seen the price of oil travel through 67 to 75, 76, like an $8 or $9 range this week. So it has been a pretty volatile week for oil. Natural gas was moving higher, is still moving higher. Natural gas is interesting. This is another one. It's a funny old market, natural gas, but it's had a good run since those lows in August. Still going, made a new high today for that recovery. I think what is interesting next week for natural gas is these old highs from mid-June. So just above 3. So 288 up to 3 for nat gas. Do we see it perhaps start to run out of steam and struggle next week? Let's see. But for now at least, and you'll see it on the hourlies, that trend is still strong. Slammed on the payrolls. But again, perhaps, the trend is up. If I was to view that as a buying opportunity, I'd be a buyer. I would probably be tempted to put my stop under the Tuesday low. So at least the other side of 260. So that's the interesting market. Still strong for me, but perhaps we're going to start running into some issues there early next week. And let's have a look at gold and silver. What's gold done? So gold, we've seen a really good run on gold out to, what's it done this year, gold? If it started the year around, well, just above 2,000 really, didn't it? 2,060. And here we are at 2,650. So it's gained 600, about 30%. $600 this year. It's had a good run. It made all-time highs in late September. It's been a bit quiet since then, but again on gold, I'd be a buyer of the dip. You know, it'd be nice to have a deeper dip. Whether we get that, let's see. If this dollar strength continues, then it could well put some pressure on gold. Looking in the short term, you can see it's been pretty sideways for the last week or so. I don't know. The closest I'd want my stop, if I was a buyer now, probably the other side of 2,600. But I think on the dailies, it's perhaps more interesting if we do get the bigger sell-off here. Let's see what next week brings. And if we do have some dollar strength, then that would put some pressure on the price of gold. What's silver? So look at silver. Where's the silver gone? I'm sure it's right in front of me and I can't see it. Gold. Oh, there, it's there. What's it doing up there? Let me bring it back. So silver is knocking on these old highs from May. So $32 an ounce, which is the best level in more than 10 years, I think. We've got to go back to end of 2012, beginning of 2013 to see silver up this high. So this is interesting. You know, for me, if I had to do anything, I'd probably go short silver. But saying that, the trend has been up. But this 32 and a half has been a problem for silver. Let's see what happens up here. Do we get the breakout next week and silver starts a move even higher still? I don't know. At the moment, I'd probably, like I say, be thinking about perhaps going short with stops above 33. But if it breaks out, I think then I'd flip the trade and start thinking about, is this thing going to get a move on and start pushing higher? So that's another interesting market to watch next week, the price of silver. What haven't we done? Let's have a look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin's just been boring. Bitcoin has just been drifting since March of this year. That hasn't changed. It's had a good run since beginning of September, from 52.5 to whatever, 66.5 to a 30% run. But it doesn't change the picture for the last 6 months or so for me. The big trend is still up. If we go back to 2023, the big trend on Bitcoin is still up. So I'd still be a buyer of the dip. It's just been a bit boring by Bitcoin standards over the last 6 months or so. So not a lot for me in there. And in currencies, obviously with the move in the dollar, that has an impact on all sorts of different markets. But I think pound against the dollar is an interesting one for next week. So if we go back to September 22, so 2 years ago now, there's this trend in place. During September this year, the pound hit its best levels in more than 2 years. So I think, the bet on pound against the dollar is, do you think the trend is still up? And I do. So I'll be thinking about being a buyer, but when the dip stops dipping. So I think that's an interesting one to watch next week. On the way up in September, the September low was around about 130. The market's 130.95 at the moment. So it's less than 100 points away from where we are now. So I think that's an interesting market to watch next week. I would be tempted to be a buyer of the dip when the dip stops dipping. Let's see what happens next week. So there's quite a bit to watch there. I mean, for me, for the rest of today, stock markets, because I've got the trade on, keep an eye on the S&P and see what happens there. That's interesting. Does this dollar index run out of steam? I don't know. Oil is interesting for next week after the moves we've seen this week. And pound against the dollar, just because we've had, it had a great run on the way up and it has dropped about 300 points in the last week or so. So that's interesting for next week, I think. So plenty to keep an eye on. I'm doing a video, I'm just recording a video now. It's slightly different to the usual videos I do, and it will go out either tomorrow or Sunday. And it's all about the trading holy grail. All right, I think it'll be about 45 minutes long. So if you're watching this and you're not subscribed to the channel, if you click on subscribe to the channel, and you'll get the notification. Click on the bell when I load that video up, when I've finished recording it and editing it. But it's good. It's, you know, normally I just knock a video out really quickly, but I put a bit more preparation into this one. I think it will be useful if you are not a consistently profitable trader. You'll hopefully find that useful, and that will go out over the weekend. But lots to watch there. So like I say, for me, US stocks are the most interesting because I've got the trade on the trailing stop. Let's see what happens this afternoon, but plenty of other things to watch next week. So what we'll do now is look at the stuff you want looking at, but a quick promotion. I run this WhatsApp group. I've been running it for more than 18 months now. It's a daily update from me, markets I'm watching, trades I'm running, Q&A throughout the day. If you sign up, if you go to my website, the link is in the description down below, davidjonestrading.co.uk, and use the code YouTube. You can sign up with a 20% discount for the first month. You can just do it month on month. Most people in there have been in there for at least 6 months, which I'm happy about, so they clearly see the value. But if you want to just do it for a month, see what it's like, you can do that, and you'll get access to that webinar. So if you go and do that, there's a snapshot of what a typical update from me, different markets that I look at. And I run a trading course that's got 5-star Trustpilot reviews. I send a newsletter out normally every week. That's free of charge, the newsletter, all on the website davidjonestrading.co.uk. So take a look at that and see what you think. And finally, if you want to know who I trade with them because it's tight spreads, so it's a cost-effective way of trading. Go to bit.ly/DavidTrade. Right, let's take a look at the stuff you want looking at. Nvidia. Yeah, Nvidia we had a quick look at that, didn't we? It's just boring. I think now, you know, what would you do? What would you do? You know, we've had the great run up, all that momentum, all the way up on Nvidia. And, you know, for fans of patterns, I'm not a fan of patterns, but they would say there's a triangle thing going on, looking something like that, I think. And it's just doing this consolidation thing, isn't it? In a narrower and narrower range. So for me, I wouldn't do anything at the moment. If I had to do anything today, I would be a seller with the stop loss at least the other side of 128 as a short-term trade. But looking at the big picture, it's just gone a bit, not surprising, it's gone a bit sideways, you know, considering it's risen so much. You know, it started the year at $50 and it touched 140. So it nearly tripled on the year into June, and these things don't go in one direction forever, do they? So for me, just a bit choppy and a bit boring until we get a breakout either through 140 or below 90. So a little bit boring, but I would be tempted to be short if I had to do anything today, just because it's near the top of the range for the last month or so. And what was the other stock? AMAT, Applied Materials. I'm sure I was in that one at some point this year. Let me have a look. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? That is interesting. So we've had big trend since October 22. Let's pick up on that quickly. So trend like that. Oh, almost textbook. Middle of September, down to the trend line, and it's held. So for me, I mean, I would be a buyer, and I'd be looking on the daily chart for a run back to 255. The only question is, where would I put my stop? And for me, it's pretty logical. I would go the other side of 170, the recent lows. So the only question is, do I wait to see if it sells off a bit and trickles back and I can get a better entry? But for me, that big trend is still up on on Applied Materials. So I think that's an interesting one, particularly if it dipped a little bit from here. What's your medium-term opinion about cryptocurrency until the end of next year? Dogecoin. Oh, I hate, the only cryptocurrency I look at is Bitcoin. So I don't like all these stupid ones, to use a technical term. I mean, there's Dogecoin, lovely, but isn't that wonderful? I mean, that's just, well, how much has that dropped? It's gone from 23 in March to 10 now. It's halved, doesn't it? So I'm not a crypto person. And it's just, I mean, if that was a share, I would have no interest in buying it. So I'd say, yeah, I think it will just continue to drift. You know, maybe, I don't know, you know, you look at Bitcoin, how boring Bitcoin's been. What's the other big one? Is it? There we go. That's not done much, is it? Oh, what's the one I'm thinking of? I can't think of it. Ether, isn't it? Ethereum. Is it Ethereum? Yes, that's the one I was thinking of. Let's have a look at that. Ethereum, what's that doing? Nothing. Oh, again. Crypto winter has started, isn't it? Yeah, it's all a bit boring, I think, the old cryptos. Maybe that'll change, but that one, Dogecoin in particular. Should we bring it up again just so we get that dog? Dogecoin. Yeah, or maybe it doesn't come out again. Just looks a little bit boring. I suppose if I was a buyer, if I was buying it, I'd put a stop under 8. So I'd be a buyer now at 10.8 and put a stop under 8 if I was buying it. But the trend has been down on that one, hasn't it? So not much interest for me on that, to be honest with you. Alibaba. It's really turned around again, hasn't it? We've looked at this a few times, haven't we? And way back here, I'd have thought, okay, the big downtrend is over. So that would have been a year and a half ago. Then it went up and it's gone a bit sideways and it's broken out like a maniac, hasn't it? I'm presuming because of what we've seen in the Chinese stock market this week, this has lifted it. So it's moved too far for me to do anything. So I wouldn't want to be a buyer. I suppose the aggressive trade, be a seller. Say it's overshot. It's had a big run. It's overshot. Go short with a stop above 121. That's what I would do. So yeah, if I looked at the last couple of years, 18 months, it looks a bit like that, doesn't it? It's just in a wide range. So has it just been boosted by what we've seen in the Chinese stock market this week? I think it probably has. Has it overshot? I don't know. But I'd be tempted to perhaps be a seller and see if we get a bit more of a return to normality for Alibaba. And Intel is we looked at this before, didn't we? And see, I want to say, I think last time I said I'd go short, and I probably still would go short. The only question is, where does the stop go? Because we had such a big gap. You know, it was trading at 28, and then a few days later, it was trading at below 20. So for me, I'd rather go short, and I'd rather sell a rally. So I'd rather see a bigger move up to go short into. If I was a buyer, if I thought, okay, the worst is over for Intel, we've had that shock on the earnings, all the bad news is priced in now. So if I was a buyer, I'd have a stop the other side of 18. So at the moment, I would rather sell. I'd rather sell if it got a bit higher. But if I wanted to buy, that is the risk reward for buying is probably better than going short here. But yeah, I'd rather sell a rally still. But interesting to see what happens. You know, it clearly, for now at least, since August, that sort of $19 area has been a base, hasn't it? So interesting to see what happens. That S&P has come all the way back. So that'd be an interesting afternoon, I think, maybe, for US stocks. What happens here? Do we see the buyers come back in or just go all the way back down? Let's see. Intel, we looked at Intel. I'm like the Peter Gabriel of trading. God, that is... You must be the same age as me. It's the Peter Gabriel who had the big hit with Sledgehammer and was in... was it Genesis, wasn't it, Peter Gabriel? God, we are showing our age here. Yeah, I'm very old. Do you think CrowdStrike is having a small recovery? CrowdStrike, because that got clobbered, didn't it? It was that big data breach thing, wasn't it, or whatever it was, where it brought the world to a standstill, didn't it? I think it is. I think again our Harry hindsight trade is to go back in time to early August and be a buyer when it came back to that trend. So I would, you know, that big trend is still up. You know, it fell, where'd it go? It halved, went from 400 to 200 pretty much. The problem I would have, as usual, is where does the stop go? The closest I'd want my stop is the other side of 240, if not further away. So yeah, I would absolutely be a buyer of the dip. I'd rather have a bigger dip to the low 220s to be a buyer. But yeah, it's interesting, that, isn't it? How it's turned it round. I mean, that was when the news broke. It was a Friday, wasn't it? So it would have been here. And then it did sell off for another couple of weeks. But interesting that it has turned it around. So yeah, that is recovering. UK gilts and US 10-year Treasury. Right, Kevin. These are interesting markets. I've mentioned it a bit, as you know, in a WhatsApp group this week. I was expecting the bounce, and we have not had it. So here's the UK gilts market. So gilts, bonds. So, you know, UK gilts, US T-bonds, European bonds, you know, have been on the slide for some time. But this is UK gilts, have had something of a bounce back over the last 12 months. So I was wondering if this trend we're in, were we going to see it bounce again this week? That's what I was looking for. And bang, it's got clobbered today. I think that's an interesting market for next week. So for me, is today's move an overreaction? And do we see a bounce next week? So again, I think maybe a potential trade there. This 97.40 on gilts was a big level. Let's see. Same with T-bonds. I mean, if you're going to watch one bond market, T-bonds is the market to watch, I would suggest. So T-bonds, again, breaking down through all sorts of support. But that trend, if I drew that trend, I mean, I could draw it back to there. I'm going to stick with that trend for now. I think it's interesting because that trend since April, that's where we are. So if it's going to bounce from anywhere, this is T-bonds, then here we are, I think. Let's see. Let's see what happens next week. So that is absolutely one for me to watch next week. The low, whatever that low is, from August, early August, could be a big one in T-bonds. Let's see. Let's see what happens next week. But absolutely clobbered today on the old non-farm payrolls. But that's another interesting market for next week. And there's the big chart for T-bonds. You know, on the slide since 2020, is it trying to turn it round? The strength we've seen over the last year? I don't know. But a lot of data out again next week with those Fed minutes out next week. That could affect the old T-bonds as well. So a really interesting market to watch, I think. But yeah, I'm looking for the bounce, but it's not happening yet. So I'm going to sit on my hands and see what happens next week with the old T-bonds. And that's it, I think. If there's no more questions, we're done. So that video will come out tomorrow. Oh, I think. I'll put it on YouTube tomorrow. It'll be a long video, about 45 minutes long. To join the WhatsApp group, which I can thoroughly recommend, use the code YouTube to get 20% off the first month, and you get access to I've completely forgotten, the webinar I did a couple of weeks ago. To sign up for the newsletter, go to the website, and to see who I trade with, go to bit.ly, David Trade. All these links should be in the description down below. But otherwise, that's it. It's been the most boring week for me in quite a few weeks of trading, because US stock markets have been so quiet. But I think, given what's happening today, I think we're in for a much more interesting week next week. So as usual, I'll be back on Friday, and we'll see where everything is. So until then, good luck with your trading, and see you next Friday.